Welcome back to the Better It Gets podcast. Today I have Joshua Wenner on, and I'm so excited to have him on. Just for context, we hung out the other night at an event and had such a fortifying conversation. I felt so lit up, satiated, energized, and I'm so excited to have him on to share his codes. And Joshua is an entrepreneur, veteran, and emotional resilience expert. He has spent the last 20 years growing companies and maximizing human potential while affecting the lives of over 500,000 humans. Joshua's coaching, curriculum, and frameworks are being used to help high achievers, successful entrepreneurs, men, women, first responders, veterans, and those who deal with high stress and trauma. He teaches emotional resilience tools to help people create the emotional freedom they deeply desire in life and in relationships. Welcome, Joshua.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here.
Yay, I'm so grateful to have you. Yeah. And a question I like to ask at the beginning of these episodes, just for context for the listeners and, just the power in sharing your story. I would love to hear how you came to this point. What in your journey led you to be where and who you are right now?
It's a deep question, but I will give a brief summary of the high level bullet points to provide some context. So I originally was a speaker and trainer with Tony Robbins. So I was more on the peak performance side about getting results, which often we like to do. And I went through some deep grief around my brother coming to ask me for help. He'd started shooting needles, started shooting heroin, and came to me on Christmas and said, I got to come live with you or I'm going to die. I told him no, because I had a startup company and I was working around the clock. And 3 days later, he went home and died of an overdose. And so that led me on this whole hero's journey to learn about grief and loss. And so initially I did what most people do, put it in a box, went home, led the service, came back and started building the company until 2008 hit. And the company that we'd finally gotten successful came crashing down, and business partner and my girlfriend at the time decided to run off together. And so ended up with loss of business partner, girlfriend, bankruptcy, all the things. Mm. And in that moment, that's when I was like, oh, I chose this over my brother, and led me on a new journey. And along that new journey, people around death and grief and loss kept showing up. And I believe our purpose is always here. We're just not always listening. And so I decided to go deeper into that work and got on grief forums. I was like, I'll help everybody, because I had my background in Tony Robbins, that I could fix it. I'll help you fix it. I fix my grief. I'll help you fix yours. And I learned very quickly I didn't know what I was doing and was failing. And so I was like, maybe I don't know what I'm doing. And so I started a documentary called The Gift of Grief that I just finished this year, which I'm really excited about. It's coming out in December. And along that journey, I was interviewing these grief experts, and then I realized I'm the one that has grief that I haven't dealt with. And so I learned from different experts around somatics of getting in the body, learning to feel some of the pain and grief. And my whole life had been external pursuits. How do I achieve more money? How do I get the beautiful girlfriend? How do I transform my body to feel better, which always left me feeling empty. And now going in and feeling the grief, I started to feel peace. Mm-hmm. And so I set out to do men's work, which I've done now for over a decade, taking men into the mountains, reframing grief and loss as your sense of power, and then a lot of hands-on somatics to help men offload layers and layers of grief through the years. Mm-hmm. That led to working with fire, police, military, which I still do through my company Valor today. And then the men, interesting enough, were like, okay, now that I'm healing my heart, I have more tools to regulate my nervous system, my emotions. They were like, my spouse is now struggling. Usually you see women are like, can I get my men in here to work on their emotions? But the men were becoming more emotionally aware and bringing that and more aware of their past trauma that they were bringing to their relationships and saying how do I have my partner meet me here? And so then we started doing couples work. And then through that, I started seeing the women were just much quicker, because I believe women are 100 years ahead of men emotionally. So the quick learning of the tools that they could practice together. And I started to see if we heal our hearts with ourselves, our relationship with ourselves, then we're able to start to heal the relationship in our partnership, which is our family dynamic. And so that's that, and the combination of my own personal journey is kind of what led me here. Mm-hmm. So the combination of my work of seeing, because I used to believe men do men and women do women, and that's why I stayed with it for a decade. But then I started seeing in my own personal journey how men could only get me so far with women. I had a lot of wounding from men, my own physical and mental sexual abuse from men that I had to heal. And I feel really clear with men and have a lot of amazing men in my life, which I'm so blessed. And they could only help me understand women to so far. And so the last 5 years of doing my own deep work around my own relationship, views on relationship, views on parents, my mom, my mother, wounding around my mother or father, really came from women, and finding really integrated women that could hold space for me and love on me. And also invite me to a deeper level of awareness, really started opening my heart. And so that new awareness of I'm so needing women now, integrated women that can hold space for men, combined with seeing how quick women were, is what led me to doing now, which I'm doing a lot more women's work, which has been really beautiful.
So beautiful. Wow. Thank you for sharing your story. There's a lot in there. And it reminds me of, we were just at a sermon the other day and him sharing the mythology of the hero's journey, and you kind of just touching on that, letting it all go and realizing, there's something bigger that wants to unfold through all of this pain. And the way that you've turned that into medicine is so beautiful. And I've been friends with you on Facebook for some time, and I remember seeing your men's work and the things you were doing, and I was very I was just, touched and inspired, and I've wanted to connect with you more about it. So I love that we're having this conversation, and to know that now you're feeling this call to work with women, and you're seeing how needed it is actually for, for men and women to work together. And I'd love to explore that more with you, because I feel that, for so long it's been I'm a woman, so I'm doing women's work. That's been my journey. And a lot of men are doing solely men's work. And I'm curious, how your work is now shifting to include women. And also, what about these integrated women is helping you feel safe?
Great perspective. So first, how would you break? So two pieces. Your first question is more around.
First question is, how are you feeling called to show up for women now?
Yes, so I feel like it ties to mother-father wounds. And where I see in the collective is, I believe that we both, men and women, need to learn how to regulate their nervous system. We need to learn how to feel the somatics that are inside, to learn how to be with our little boy and girl that didn't get the love they needed. And so are oftentimes lonely, scared, afraid, feeling unwanted, unloved, abandoned. And the wounding we felt in childhood that we kind of suppress down is oftentimes what's showing up to dysregulate our nervous system, because the nervous system is looking for threat. And oftentimes on matters around the heart, we go to that very quickly to protect ourselves. And so around the men's work, we put through 1,000 men in our rites of passage. And one of the big foundational tools was emotional regulation and learning to feel some of those wounding using somatics. And I got to see the visceral difference when men would practice it every day and how that would show up. And so what I've been seeing in the collective, because of the content I create, I see women that are very open and that are very hey, I'm looking for new things. Please share new pieces with me, or new pieces of anything I can use to get better. And then I see some angry women that are almost feeling very valid, because they've obviously had some pain and anger with men. But I see it's almost he needs to change. And so that's more the call that I'm feeling, is is there a man that can hold space to show them it's not the man that they're thinking from their childhood. And whether it's taking ownership, whether it's showing new ways of loving, holding presence, deep presence, listening, validating, just to feel what that feels like, validating emotion. Because I find women will shrink. Typically, they'll either play small, or they are scared to be big, or they come a little sharp. So when they learn that all of you is welcome here, be your biggest, boldest self, and also to go within to find places to make at peace with self, I find that's what creates the healing. So I think my deepest passion is just to hold space. I think we need more traditional, I would call it masculine men, holding that container, just like I deeply need that from women. And I think that was your second question was, I'll think of one story. There were so many examples, but one of my good friends, Alexi, was holding space for me, and I was asking her, more like a safe place to say, here's some of my feelings of inadequacy. Like, who can I bring my inadequacy to that's a woman, feeling like I had such high standards of what I needed to accomplish as a man to be valuable and worthy. Like, oh, to be a king, I need to be making X number of dollars and rating myself based on my own expectations of societal standards to provide. And her reflecting back like, oh no, it's more about all these other things, your ability to hold emotional presence, your ability to have emotional capacity. Because when a woman can claim her own sovereignty, she's got herself. Yes, she likes the providing in a deep way, but there's so many ways to provide. And you already have so much strength in these other areas that you've been discounting those and placing all the value on the wealth. And so as soon as I heard a woman's perspective of seeing me in an area where I already have value that I was discounting, it allowed me to take the pressure off the financial and be like, oh, and reach out to a bunch of friends, say, what do I do here? And it quickly accelerated an area that I'd struggled with just because there wasn't the pressure of like, this is my value anymore. It was like, oh no, I'm already valuable and worthy. So I think it's the same thing with women, like realizing that we're already value and worthy, just being ourselves. And oftentimes the feminine qualities have been discounted or shamed or made wrong to live in a more patriarchic society. So realizing there's so much value in like a woman's radiance. There's so much value in her receptivity. There's so much value in her nurture that have often been looked at as weak. And so they're either collapsed under, back to the collapse, or kind of made sharp to attack, versus when it's like turning that on, it like melts us, right? So it's like there's so much power, I guess, in that. Just like a man really developing both his directional focus and his ability to hold deep presence is so nurturing to a woman, right? So I think we're learning these deeper skills we can cultivate, one for us first, because if we can't give it to us, we have nothing to give. And then when we can really give it to us, now we have so much more to give.
Right. So beautiful. And what do you feel like, what are the practices, some practices a man can practice to cultivate his directionality and his emotional capacity for the feminine?
Yeah, great question. Well, a couple of things on direction. You have to have a vision. And so most men are lacking vision, or they're scared of vision. So really getting clear, like, what is a vision, and actually just building a plan. Like I find with women, it's often like men get caught in these shadows of like making up a vision, but there's no reality to it. It's kind of like a pie in the sky, or fantasizing a role, but there's no actual implementation. So really like, and just start where you're at, build a really clear plan, and then actually like do the math, sit down and figure out, how do I make this work, and be moving towards it. Because I find, at least my experience has been, a woman is less concerned with like how big the vision is. She has to match it with her vision, but it's like, is he directional? Does he know where he's going? If she asks questions, is she like, oh, I've thought through the plan? Is she going to be like, well, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. And he's like, oh yeah, I got this. I got this. I got this. She's like, oh, I can relax because I'm not having to think of the plan for him. Or if his plan's inflated and this doesn't make sense, then she's not feeling safe. So, right. So she needs to feel like he's got not only the vision that he's saying, his words, but then when I ask him questions about, does the plan make sense? Instead of being like triggered, he's like, got it. Got it. Let me show you the plan. Let me show you. He's thought through it. So I think there's not just the vision and the plan, but the thought through actionable steps. And to go deeper into that, a woman like looking for appreciation if a woman brings questions versus fear of inadequacy.
Right.
Like, oh gosh, she's triggering my wound, versus like, oh, thank you for inviting me into where I may not have my plan totally figured out. And then the depth could be like, instead of reacting to like, because as men, one of our greatest wounds is fear of failure. So it's like, here's the plan and we're saying it. She's like, but I don't think this is going to work, or I don't think that's going to work. It triggers that inadequacy or that fear of failure. And so then our nervous system takes on and we react in protective mechanisms. So combining both the vision and depth of presence, if we can be emotionally regulated every day, if we can learn to notice those slight micro reactions and learn to go in to feel what's going on in the body, it's usually back to that past trauma, that past grief, trauma, sadness, aloneness, inadequacy. I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. And be with those parts of us, which is really difficult, painful work. It's in the belly. It's like down here. But the more we cultivate it, the deeper our presence becomes. And then it's learning to really like breathe in. So oftentimes you'll feel a man here. So what we're doing is we're breathing that into the body So we open up our heart, we open up down lower, and this is where all the grief and trauma is stored, is right in the center column. So I typically, like, I can feel where a man's at. And that's often like, where's his level of development? And men are very directional focused. So there's so many nuances, but oftentimes a man is here on his mission driving, but having really deep practices to cultivate his connection with his body, his connection with, let's say, his little boy, and his connection with his wounds. Because a big part of men's work is like knowing the dragon I've been fighting, like it's this external dragon, is me. And so when I can now take the ownership to look at that and to like have it here at all times, now it's not like there's this dragon out to get me. It's like, oh, I see you. When the nervous system gets dysregulated, when little slight things in our external environment or our self-awareness of us, we can go, oh, I see you again. I got you. Of course you're here. And so we go back to the practices, and that allows us to have more of that presence. So if I had to put it directly, our ability to be emotionally regulated with our nervous system and have tools and awareness, and our ability to be deeply with our body and our wounding and be able to exist and breathe with that allows us to expand our capacity and presence to be with you.
Right. It's like knowing your dragon. It's facing your dragon, knowing your dragon, and working with just the whole constitution of your being every day while staying directional. So what are some practices that men can use? Like, say a man has his vision, he's got his direction. However, he hasn't like built that emotional depth, or he really can't hold presence for very long. What are some practices and tools that he can start implementing to deepen?
Yeah, the primary foundational tool I teach is emotion regulation. And I have a framework I teach called CPR. And I got it from the first responders I work with, because you use CPR when somebody's unconscious. So oftentimes, if we're not aware of our nervous system, we're in the back of the brain, which is more survival reactions, which means whatever you've repped since childhood is what you're going to rep. If you've been the achiever, you're going to keep achieving to try to find some validation or to look externally for something. So emotional regulation, what it does is it moves you from the back of the brain to the front of the brain. Front of the brain brings compassion, empathy, and rational thinking. So most men like rational thinking. So the key with that is CPR means conscious awareness of when I'm activated, or I'll say signs and symptoms. The body's sharp, you're over talking people, you're driving obsessively, addictions, depression, anxiety, could be stuck on the phone 24 hours a day, checking your bank accounts obsessively, like a whole number of things where we're kind of like here, and conscious awareness, I'm here, or I'm in some sort of pattern. P is the pause, literally stop. And in conflict, I teach how to build a strategy to create a pause, or if they're driving hard and they can be an asshole, like how to build a pause before they get there. So like finding pattern interrupts to take a pause. And then the R is regulation. And there's 5 primary types of regulation that I teach. And the first one is 4-6 breathing. So the key is we're accessing the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in the body. And these are all getting us out of head, back into body. So 4-6 breathing is just an in-breath of 4 and an out-breath of 6. But the key is you have to do it for 6 minutes. The way I teach it is you do it daily, twice a day. And you can stack it with other things. But the reason we do that is I use the metaphor, it's like filling up the gas in your tank. So if you're a sports car, I use this frame for men. I got to think of another one for women. The women are like, Lamborghini, Ferraris. I don't know if this matches us. But with men, they really identify with like, oh, you're a Lamborghini and you're driving on red line all the time. What happens if you don't fill up the gas and maintain your vehicle? It's going to break down. And high performance vehicles actually need more maintenance, not less. So the gas is, if you have a big mission and you're carrying a lot, career, finances, partner, kids, body, each thing is something you're carrying with your emotional capacity. If you don't have gas in your tank, you're not going to be able to drive a long distance, or one little thing's going to throw you off and you're going to lose your presence, your connectivity to the moment. So first, you have to be regulating daily. That's why I say do it twice a day. And then when you're dysregulated, do it again. Other ways you could do it are through cold immersion. So I'm a big advocate of cold plunging. I do it every day. I advise they do it daily as well, just because it gets you there fast, right? You're like, you're like, okay, I'm back in my body really quickly. You can do it with cold water in the face or ice cubes in the face, exercise, physical contact, or vocal. So using your vocal cords. The fastest way is a combination of physical touch with breath. So if you have a spouse, I'm a big advocate of having reintegration practices where, like, let's say every day you come home and he gets a couple minutes to go get regulated, then she gets a couple minutes or vice versa. And then they come back together and they do some regulated breathing while they're using touch, physical contact. So they're knowing, hey, we're both coming into the evening, putting our day away so we can be really present and connected to each other.
I love that.
And creating it as a ritual.
I was going to say ritualizing.
Ritualizing it.
Yeah. Ritualizing the synergy, because I feel that that's so important in relationship, that, yeah, the regulation we're doing with ourselves, but the co-regulation and like having space designated for that so that we can like, yeah, get back on the same page and kind of, you know, let the day go. And I know that that can be really hard for some men also because they're like so oriented toward the mission that actually pausing. One of my favorite acronyms for pause is postpone action until serenity emerges. And I feel that that can be really challenging for men to do, to hit that break and to be present, right? I feel like when we're present, it's like we feel like we're facing infinity. And what I've observed, at least in my partnerships with men, is that facing infinity can feel really disarming and almost like it's throwing them off, rather than how maybe women see it, which is like, you know, you're actually deepening into the moment to have more substance to bring to the mission, right? So I'm curious what women can do to be that safe space for men to feel like they can drop in.
Great question. Well, I think there's a couple things too of just how we're wired different. Like we are masculine, pure masculine energy is directional focus, whereas pure feminine is more receptive focused, right? Or they use the metaphor of like the feminine's life, right? Where the masculine's more of like all of consciousness. And so oftentimes we're so directionally focused. I use like a metaphor, we're like this. Like if we're focused on mission, we're here, then we come to you, we're here, and then we're back. Like it's like this type of directional focus. So often when she's like, I need your presence, he's here and he's like, okay, I have to like, he's trying to get to here, but he's still thinking of this piece. Whereas women are like, I can do this at the same time. What's going on? Like, come on, get with the program. So I think just the understanding that where his directional focus is, making requests to say, hey, I really love like using acknowledgement, using praise, using things of like receptivity. So because some women look at it as mothering, I think there's a distinction also from mothering to like bringing your nurturing energy. If you're really in your receptivity, and as a woman, if you've had to work really hard to generate results, it's a lot to carry. So when you've done it, you're like, oh, I have so much compassion for what he's carrying. How can I acknowledge what he's carrying, be really receptive to what he's carrying, and like really welcome him into like, I have this well of nurture to here to share. In our presence, it's a way for him to get filled back up. It's not another demand on him, but it's a way that we can have deep connection, which is a source of his power to go keep building. So with it, it's like, oh, I'm grateful that you're building, because often they see it as this is taking away from me and us. So they're fighting his mission. And so he's like, I'm doing this for you, because usually he's doing it not for him, which is some men, yes, but if they're in the shadow, which I call the savage man, they're more in consumption of everything. But the majority of men I find, even the savage men, their deepest need is they want to serve. They're just kind of caught and a little bit blinded. So if she knows he's actually doing this thing to serve me, there's another way that I could be served at a deeper way now that's more of a priority than what he's building. Then it's acknowledging him for, hey, I see how hard you're working. I'm so grateful for how you work for us. What would really mean so much to me is if we have dedicated, focused time here. So he kind of knows to go, let me turn the focus to give you my full attention and finish what I'm doing so that I can give you that presence. So it's not like quick in the second, if that makes sense. Because that's just, it's like a really good metaphor I like to use. Because tell me if this is fair. If you're saying you want to feel his presence, you want to feel him in his heart. So think of a woman, typically a woman's like, can he just go slower with my body? Is that fair? Can he slow down a little bit? Can he tease my mind? Can we have some intimacy before we go to sex?
Foreplay, yeah.
Foreplay. So think about that's the way a man is to get from his head to his heart. So how do you take the same patience to allow him to go, oh, how do I create the foreplay to get him away from his work, to allow him to like get into his heart, to be here with me? Just like I would want for him to create some more intimacy and foreplay so that my body can turn on to him sexually.
Right.
So it's the same. So I think the appreciation of what he's doing, the invitation that, hey, we're here, life is right here, right now. And creating rituals, again, is another really good way to do it. Hey, even some boundaries. Like, hey, can we have work shuts off at 7:00 and we get to spend really present, connected time together? So he knows. I had a funny story. I had a girlfriend. She was Ukrainian, so she was pretty sharp. But I remember she was like, day stops at this time. And I'd always work through the night, right? So it never was a thing. And when we were living together, it was like if I was a minute over, she would be angry and upset. And so I learned really quickly. I was like, yeah, but I'm 5 minutes. For her, like that's when work stops. And so I even learned through that, because that became the boundary and the ritual. If I wanted connection with her, oh, okay, I have to restructure my day so that I finish my work and the time to clean up, so I can literally shut things down, get myself ready to then come back and to be present with her. And I loved it once I got there. I just needed to like reorientate. And sometimes I couldn't do that for myself, because I found that as more of the priority until her stronger boundary. And also said, because she, like, I could feel she wanted to be there with me. It wasn't like I need you to stop, and then she was preoccupied all night. So then I was like, well, I could be working right now. Because I would say some women do that. Some women are like, I want you here, but they think they can multitask. And he's like, now I've given you undivided attention, but you're doing 7 things. I could go back to work.
Right.
So I think it's really like both cultivating a practice to be really present and really connected as a ritual.
So beautiful. I love that you spoke into that, because I do feel that that's a big topic, like having exactly that ritual, that time to put that away and plug into the texture of our union and the quality of our union. Because if we don't do that, disconnect is going to keep breeding. We're not going to be present to the quality of each other, right? And then it's kind of going to be harder to get back to that equilibrium together. I know for me, something that I'm so sensitive to is like to start the day and to end the day, like the morning and the night are so sacred to me, and I love to live my life in ritual and ceremony. So I wake up and I don't want to be inundated by social media or by anything external. I want like silence and presence and really attuning to the quality of the moment and being in nature and drinking my cacao and praying over it. And sometimes like if my partner is like wanting to play loud music and like, it's like there's this, it feels so startling to my nervous system. Similarly, at the end of the day, if he's still on his phone and like listening to work things or like scrolling on Instagram and I'm hearing the noise in the field, my nervous system's like, so that's kind of been a practice. Is I feel that the feminine's nervous system is so much more sensitive than the masculine's, especially when we're going through the different phases of our cycle. And I'm like, for you, when she would bring that to you, would you feel triggered by that request?
Initially, because of how she brought it.
Okay.
She brought it with anger and upset. And so that's a big part of like tuning that in, is how do you practice bringing it from the heart, but with firm boundaries. Right. So that's why back to like the shrinking or the rigidity, it's like the shrinking is like, here's my boundary. And then if it's not met, I'm just going to shrink, versus like, no, I'm a demand for this quality relationship that we're going to have to earn. Like, it's not just, and both of us are going to have to earn it. And we're going to have to work. So it's like, it's holding self-respect, holding the standard of the relationship. And then also like not turning into like more the critical, because that's the other side, is like, I've asked you, you're late again, and the frustration builds, and then it turns into a sharp. And so it's finding that medium of like, what would be the actual heart's expression? Like, I want to feel you. I miss you. I'm craving your touch. I'm craving your connection. I'm craving your presence. Like, that's what's actually going on, but that hurts. So she gets into the sharp. So if she can reveal the heart, if the boundary's not met, and let him feel that, that triggers our like, what do I got to do to take care of you? So that's, I think that's the work on the feminine side, is like, and also getting clear, like, what is most important. And then having that alignment conversation of like, hey, just try this with me for like, if your mornings and your evenings, say, hey, could you try this with me for a week? And maybe you have an hour, but maybe he could do 30 minutes or 20 minutes.
Or even like 15.
Yeah. But it may be saying like, hey, can we try this practice that's going to cultivate the ultimate vision of our relationship and see if this is more nurturing for you to accomplish your mission. So also tying it back to, you're wanting this deep connection. And if he's more energized from that, because it's nurture, you're naturally attuned to like, oh, this is going to nurture me more so that I have more aliveness through the day. We're more attuned to like, how do I accomplish and achieve? So we often miss the nurturing places of how to nurture ourselves. Like typically women are saying, I need safety and I don't feel safe. So they're wanting masculine for safety. We're typically wanting the feminine for nurture. And we both lack it with ourselves.
Right.
So women are learning, how do I create my own safety versus needing him to give it? Men are learning, how do I create my own nurture? And the deeper you get into integration practices, you're like, oh, my nurture is really important for me achieving more. If my space is messy, if I'm not taking the time to do it, that's now an action signal that I'm dysregulated. Because when I do it, I'm so good and I'm so much better because you're not as rigid, if I had to describe it. So you're moving through the world not like laser rigid. You're a little bit more present, which allows time to slow down a little bit and for you to accomplish more.
Yeah, that's huge. It's so huge. And, you know, with that whole piece around, you know, like the masculine, you were saying like it creates safety for us. Something that I've also observed is that like knowing that a man can regulate and like actually sit in stillness for even 10 minutes a day, to just be with self, I feel that that actually evokes so much safety. It's less about me needing him to regulate me or like the safety of that, but when I see that like a man or my partner can prioritize his regulation and his internal constitution, then there's such a safety that I feel because I can feel not only his presence with just me, but with the humans that are around, with the quality of the moment, with what the moment's needing, with how the moment needs a provider or a protector, you know? And that's something that I like, yeah, maybe we can talk about this too, is like, traditional masculine ways of like chivalry and like being really attuned to the environment and being that pillar, that protector. I remember when we were out the other night, there were 2 occasions, I believe, where women came up to you and felt very safe with you. One of them asked you to move this table and then to like watch her whole booth as she did something. And there was another woman who was really intoxicated and she felt safe to come like be near you. I could feel she didn't feel maybe safe in her own body. So yeah, what do you have to say around just being that pillar and that protector? I think the world needs so much more of that.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah.
I'm like the go-to guy, like you. But I think I'm a big advocate of that. I think it's really like built into how we're wired. But I think it does take daily regulation. Like I've been doing this for a decade, and I still have my own faults. I'm still struggling. I still get dysregulated. I still fall down. I still make mistakes. I still notice subtleties of when I'm in my head or I'm a little too sharp.
Are you human?
Yeah, exactly. But I guess my point is, this is like, it's really hard to sit down and do something simple every day consistently. But the benefits are so big that you start to do it. I started first noticing it just to give it more value for daily regulation. And then I'll loop back. I remember seeing in my coaching clients, like I would call it looping, where they would show up with the same story. And that's when I was just saying, hey, you should do regulation when you're dysregulated. When I moved it to like every day you're going to do this, or we stopped coaching together twice a day and created a higher standard, they stopped looping. And so what it showed me is like, oh, and what it was with me is I wasn't doing it every day at that point. And when I started saying, I'm just going to do this every day as part of my morning ritual, my evening ritual, 1, it got me present. I could see what was going on in those moments. 2, I was like, oh, my patterns are stopping. And then 3, I was able to make it like a standard, because if they loop, they're not doing the work and you have to do the work. I'm not going to do it for you. So that's, I think, the skill set, because what I'm doing is a skill set. The skill set of creating presence is a skill set of getting regulated and then feeling the big emotions that you have so that you have more capacity. So back to the capacity. I use a metaphor of like, imagine you have this bucket and it's full of big rocks. And these are all the big things you have on your plate. Well, if you have all these things, there's no emotional capacity left for being in the space and noticing what anybody needs, or checking in and noticing it's not what your woman says, it's what her body's telling you to say, like, oh, okay, she's saying I'm good, but her body's like, she's not good. But if you have no capacity, you can't see it. So if you're regulating, it's almost like removing the rocks out of the bucket. And well, let's say removing the top rock. If you're able to go in and feel some of the big emotions, that's what starts to create more emotional capacity, because you have less grief, trauma, anger stuff in the body, which means you're like, oh, I can access more. I can actually be more available to the moment. I can see what's actually happening and then choose to engage. So I think it's deeply needed, but it's an integrated practice because most of the practices are very feminine. Feeling my grief is a feminine practice. So I'm using my masculine to create a container, and then I'm getting into very uncomfortable emotions and sounds and movements. And it's like, I mean, when I first did it, I was like, what am I doing? Right? It feels so, but women are like, yes. Right. So I think that's where we're learning to be very integrated, to learn how to do that. So I think that's men's work is both deepening into the consciousness awareness and mastering nervous system and emotional regulation. But I still don't believe that we'll be more aware than women. My personal belief is that you're just so far ahead of us that I actually believe women lead emotionally. And so they're like the guideposts. So oftentimes I'll attune to the women because I'm attuned, but they're more attuned. Like a woman will catch like, you're angry. And we're like, what? And then like an hour later, you're like, oh, now I'm angry. Or like the women in my life have always like caught something and I'm like, no. And I'll deny it because I don't even feel it yet because I'm still in here. And then a while later, I'm like, oh, I was angry. How did she get it that quick? So I think as a woman, you are more attuned and your brains are developed where you can jump back and forth between rationale and emotion where ours can't. So I think when that can be used as like, oh, knowing, almost like an oracle, knowing you're much more advanced, not having the same expectations to meet us. But if there can be a symbiotic relationship where we're like, oh, because like as an example, a lot of the cultures like men need to lead in all areas. But if I believe a woman's leading emotionally, then there's a setup where she's going to be angry at him every time he's not emotionally, but he's never going to meet her. Yeah. Versus like, any little bit that he meets me in, I'm going to like see that and like aliven that. And then we're just very simple. And I want the women to know this. Like we're like ring the bell, get a treat. We're very similar to dogs. It's like, cause they say a woman runs a cycle in a month. We run it in a day. So most of our cycles are the same day in and day out every day. And when we want, so far deepest desire is to serve you. And then based on your nervous system reactions, we get to see what lands. If you start to notice like the little things where we are present or we are coming alive or we are connected and you really are receptive to that.
That's a treat.
It's a treat. Every one of those is a treat. And we're like, oh, I won here. Like we want to be the hero. So it's like, oh, I'm the hero. Oh, I'm the hero. And so you're going to get more of what you appreciate. And that's going to lead us to open more, to become more regulated, to notice when we paused and took a moment versus reacting. So it's more building on still having boundaries on the pieces that aren't working and talking through those, but really building up. And I really want to point on this because I see a lot of women are like, that's mothering. And they have a judgment that I don't want to have to mother a child. And for me, it's like, how would I describe it? It's like, I see it as being the child by not choosing to be emotionally open and loving with our gifts. So like, what if a man was like, I'm not going to provide because you're not my daughter. Versus like, oh, I love to give. I want to make you feel so safe. Like, oh, I got this. So you can just relax. Like, instead of looking at it like, why do I always have to get everything for her? Versus like, oh, I'm happy to give this to her. How do we be more generous with our gifts? If she's more emotionally aware, how does she be more generous with that and bring light and nurture and awareness to the areas that so he can see like, oh, this wins with her. How do I go more here so I can feel more connected to her? Because we want it. We just don't know how to do it. And then if it's met with upset or anger, then we're like, I can't win. Where can I win? And then men will also often get buried in work because they're like, I want to win so deeply, but I don't know how to do it. But
it keeps hitting on my wounds.
Keeps hitting my wound because it's not enough or it's triggering.
Get my validation through my work.
So I'm going to go get it so I can win. Where can I win?
Where can
I succeed? Because if the wound is I'm not going to succeed, or if you're a failure, where can I win? But if he learns how to win with you, then he's like, oh man, I win here. He's going to start to reprioritize that. So yes, I believe men's work is learning to do that without a woman prefacing it. And I think it can be accelerated much faster, or even without men's work, if a woman can really get masterful at that. Just like I've seen men get really masterful at leading, and women can flip just from seeing that, like we respond to each other. So both can work.
So like what I'm hearing here for the ladies too is, how can we set him up for success, knowing what our differences are and honoring the differences and seeing how they're coming together to create the cohesiveness of the union. And also like, that piece around, okay, I'm naturally protecting and providing her without infantilizing her, and I'm naturally nurturing and pouring my love and radiance into him without infantilizing him, is like, I'm taking this person as a part of myself. This is the unit, it's like the three entities, him, her, or her and her whatever gender, and then the middle is the unit and the entity of the unit, and it's like, what are we both bringing here?
Well, yes, and a big piece is I think as a collective, we're moving out of codependency, which codependency is, I'm doing this for you and you're doing this for me.
Right,
That
like
was
tit
old.
for tat.
That was old traditional relationships. We needed each other for survival. Very needed. Independence is like, I got me, you got you. Interdependence is, I got me, you got you. But what would love do? And so we're getting really good at going like, oh, if I'm resourced enough, love would just give. If I'm not resourced, she's got her, so I can just take care of myself, or vice versa. She's going, hey, what would love do? I'm super resourced. I can just give it and I don't need something back. Or you know what? I got to take care of myself. He's got this. So if we can start to practice there, that's where life gets really good.
Right. And taking it like one metaphysical step further, I'm like, what was coming through is, if we also prioritize being resourced with the divine, with God, with whatever we want to call that frequency too. And if we're practicing our own regulation and really deep in our own ritual with life, then the ways in which I've experienced the divine resource that comes through too, like the divine mother and the divine father that come through, it takes a lot of the pressure off the relationship, because we are prioritizing our relationship with divinity and life itself through this emotional regulation. And then the relationship with beloved, with the partner, just becomes kind of a mirror of that. And I think a lot of the times we do put so much pressure on the actual physical mortal relationship, but actually it's so much more than that.
Well, yeah, you make a really good point. And where I see that originates is in childhood. Most of us didn't get our needs met, even if you had a good childhood, which is not like a high T. They talk about high T, little T, like big trauma, little trauma. But I find all of us, didn't get our needs met at some level. And so oftentimes what we did is we romanticized the perfect vision of love. And so for decades, we've been going like, oh, this is where I'm going to get my needs met. This is where I'm going to get my needs met. And then we meet somebody like, you're that vision.
Right.
And it's like oxygen. So in the codependency, we're hyper attuned to that person being the source of love, like aliveness, like air, oxygen. So what we're practicing moving out of codependency is exactly what you said, moving that out of the way, moving a deeper connection with God's source, nature, where we can be held within in those messy parts, abandonment, inadequacy, feeling alone, unloved with ourselves, knowing we're safe. We can find that safety. And so that removes the pressure from them, because now they're here, not here. And when something's not working, we're like, okay, I'm just going to take some space and be with myself. And or before I react really quickly, let me take a moment and what's coming up for me? Let me be with that so I can really come from my heart, not from a past projection of mom, dad wounds.
Right. So huge. And then that comes back to the inner parenting. And I do want to go into mother and father wounding a little deeper with you. And also just the prioritization of our relationship with God, with source, with the divine, with nature, and how that comes into play in relationship, right? Like how can men prioritize their relationship? Maybe I can share about women, or you can too if you want. How can men prioritize their relationship with a source much greater than themselves to be on that true like hero's journey?
Yeah, so when I was doing rites of passage work and the journey from what we would call prince to king, which is rite of passage, is you're moving from self to service. So the primary focus of everything you do as a prince is like me. Consumption, what do I have to do to fill my bucket up to be enough, essentially? When we move into like more of the king, it's like, how do I serve? So it's like, how do I serve my partner? How do I serve God? How do I serve my community? How do I serve my body? Like it converts from looking at the world from what am I going to get to what am I going to give? So for me, that's the foundational difference of a more integrated masculine man or a high value man versus a man who's still on his way. And high value men are still going to fall at times, but they can become aware of it and move back into it. So I also want to give a distinction so that there's not this standard, because I see this is another pattern women do. They have a distrust of men, and then they have really high standards, and they're waiting for him to fall. And they're like, see, this is you, versus we're all still going to make mistakes no matter how integrated, no matter how much work he's done. Right. We're going to make mistakes.
We're all human.
We're all human. So it's not about the mistake. It's about his actions and his awareness around that. And does he take ownership and find a new plan and move forward? Right. But it's really about service as the primary area that you're guided from to. And I believe for me personally, it's like, how do I have that as my primary? Because it removes everything else. And I can always go back to surrender. Like, what do you want me to do? Yeah. How can I serve?
That to me is a high value man. God is first, and then everything else comes as the extension of the devotion to being in service to that. And I love that you're speaking into the archetypes. I want to hear from you too. What constitutes a high value man? And then what is this piece around the savage and the nice guy?
Great question. It's a pretty loaded question, but I will say, so oftentimes growing up with fathers, back to father wound, men often model their fathers or do the opposite. So if they had a nice guy, meaning maybe he was a really good man, but he didn't have strong boundaries, he didn't have directional, big purpose, big plan, but he was a really nice man, then that would be more what I'd say is the nice guy. He's a really nice, sweet man, but he doesn't have a boundary. He doesn't have an edge. He's not willing to make mistakes or kind of fall outside the rules.
Which doesn't feel safe.
Which creates the safety from a woman because she's like, she's going to test. And when he just appeases everything she says, she's like, I can't trust you because you won't check me. Totally. So I have to handle it. Yeah. The flip side is the man who did the opposite, where he's so directionally focused that it's all about consumption. So it's more like, this gets framed a lot as narcissistic, but it's more like money, power, control, everything's about consumption. So it's almost like I'm going to consume the world. What really is, it's an angrier version of power. I'm choosing power and this side's choosing peace at a high level. Integration is integrating both. So, and I find it falls in the nervous system. So a high value man would, as an example, he's striving towards having his words and actions aligned, right? He's willing to, he has a vision, a purpose of where he's going. He may be really loving and sweet, but he's got a boundary. He's not going to just listen to what you say and validate it, right? So it's more, he's like, here's where I'm going. He's checking in with himself, if he's done the regulated work, to know what his truth is. So he's willing to be different than yours. And oftentimes he will be, right? So it's, but I think the big difference is often women know these two. What I'll say about high value is it's unknown. So another way for a woman to feel that is like, what feels unknown and scary? Because oftentimes they're like, I keep attracting this or this. I get the nice guy and then I get the savage guy, or I go back and forth. But I'm like, well, what about this guy? And my own experience of dating has been, sometimes they're like, I know you're not one of these guys, but I don't know what you are. And now I'm scared. And so I get that quite a bit, is like, almost like, this is way too scary, because it's even scarier to the heart. Like, oh, what if I open up my heart and then I get hurt? So it's just easier to stay in what's safe. And it's what men do with high value women as well. Men are like, I don't know what that is, but I know what these old patterns are. So I'm going to choose these because they're safe. So it's what we do is we get stuck in the same patterns. But I think the easiest way to look at it is who is on a continual practice of doing the work but they have the general components. They have a vision of where they're going from the man's perspective. He has a vision where he's going. He says what he means and follows through with his word.
Integrity.
He's deeply integrity. If he makes mistakes, he owns it and finds a new plan to get there. He can lean into difficult conversations and take ownership, which is really hard to do, because you've learned to go, my value and worth is not defined if I fail. I can be with my wound, so I can be in these more vulnerable conversations without trying to overcompensate. It's like, all right, here's the mistake I made. I'll be with the wound myself, take the heat, and then go, because his integrity is more important than being right or how he's perceived. It's more about an integration with his own integrity with himself.
Right.
So it's a different piece. So there's a lot of different examples I could give, but I think the general energetics feel a little bit easier for a woman to go like, is he nice guy? Is he savage guy? Or is he kind of a mix of the two that I can't quite understand because I maybe don't have an example of it?
Totally. Yeah. Wow. That's really powerful. I mean, it's the peaceful power, like peaceful warrior energy. Like, I don't want him to be a dick. I don't want him to be, like condescending to the waiters, or, just like super unattuned to the environment in the ways in which he can be a safe pillar, not just for me, but for the whole environment. And I also don't want him to be a doormat that everybody can walk all over, including me, because then, there's like an incongruence in who's leading in the relationship. Like, there's no backbone, right? We need to feel the backbone, and also like to not feel like a man that's too savage and consumptive and distracted and like just extractive. It feels like an extractive energy versus the other energy is like doormat.
That's it. Yeah. So that's how they can feel the differences. And the only subtle difference I'll give about integrated high value, they're the same to me, is the slight differences based on nervous system responses. So that somebody that's fight or flight, they're going to react quicker. They're going to be more decisive. They just have a fight. They go into a fight response. So they're naturally going to be more competitive, more attack focused, more on the power side, but they've done enough work to integrate that. But they're still going to be a little bit there. Versus the guy that has a freeze appease nervous system is going to be a little bit more compassionate, understanding, asking questions, but he can still lean in with his. So that's how you test. Because that's how I train women is like, bring more awareness to conversations up front, ask deeper questions and feel how he's reacting and how he's responding. And then you'll feel the subtle differences because they might dismiss somebody that's like nice guy, but he's not. He just feels gentler, but he actually can really lean in if something comes up that he needs to.
Right.
And a guy over here, they might judge as savage, but he's not. He's just quick to respond there. But if they ask more questions, he'll take ownership and open his heart and shift. So both sides can shift, and that's the integration they're looking for. Can he lean into both? And that starts to feel like, oh, he can access both of these.
Which feels safer. And what do you feel, or what would you say a high value man is looking for in a woman?
Great question. I think, because I have a lot of amazing individual friends that do a ton of work. And what I'll say is the primary thing that I hear amongst the men is like, who can be there for me when I need it? And that's probably the primary wound is like, oftentimes we love to give and we love to handle things and we love to take care of it. But then there's moments when we're like, oh, I just ran a big event or I'm actually shot. And then it's like, I just need, like, this would be the moment if she could just nurture me for these couple of days or these couple of moments and see this is that moment that I need it. That's usually the biggest area that's missing is like, where can I receive? I'd say that's what they're desiring the most of like somebody that can meet them. I have a lot of conversations of like discerning who's the princess or who's the maiden from like, let's say the queen. And that's a lot of what our conversations is. Oftentimes they're looking at maiden or princess is who's looking of what a man's going to do for them is an easy signs to kind of weed out more princess maiden. Like even on the dating profiles, I remember it'll say like, it'd say something like, I'm looking for somebody to take me on trips, take me in a nice, like all the things are what you're going to do for me, not like, who is he?
Right.
So a man's like going like, can she see me? Similar to how a woman is like, is he just see my body?
Yeah.
Or is he actually getting to know me?
Yeah.
I'd say it's the flip side. It's like, oh, who's the internal parts? I would also say it's not based on age. It's amount of her aliveness. So the more aliveness that's cultivated, the more attractive a woman is. So the men aren't saying these are the age gaps. It's more like who's most alive.
Right.
So who's done the work to integrate it, own her own same things, emotionally regulate, because you'll notice more high value men have done the work or are doing the work. And that, I think a lot of times women think that women just do it, but in conflict, that's where they struggle sometimes to also do the work. So it's like, oh, can she take ownership or is she just going to blame me? And that's oftentimes what I hear often in the collective is like, oh, I'm still blamed for it, of taking all of it. Can we both be taking mutual ownership and both be opening our work, or am I just going to have to carry it?
Right.
Did I give context, or maybe I talked more about the problems?
Absolutely. Beautiful.
But I think that's what I see as the need that most men that have done a lot of work are desiring.
Right.
And finding that that's a lot rarer. If you move away the princess maidens and you start to look at the queens, that's really what they're assessing. Like, oh, are they going to blame me? Do they just need me to be daddy? And are they going to blame me when something comes up, or are they going to express their stuff and I'll hold space and validate? And can they also do it for me? Which is more integration. So they're saying like, who's actually integrated? And that's what's a little bit harder to find.
Wow, that's super powerful. Yeah, and there was one other piece that you and I had discussed around, because this is something that I want to bring up for women, because I know a lot of women are like, oh, high value men or older men who are coming of a ripeness of age are solely looking for younger women. However, I think there's a biological component that we talked about too, which is like, well, the age range gives enough time and space for a man to get to know a woman before procreating. And I think sometimes, like with women, when the biological clock is ticking, they do just have their like I need my man that I'm going to like procreate with. And you guys actually have a need too, which is to really get to know the woman, right? You were saying this before starting a family and spending your life with them.
Yeah. So one of the things we talked about is, and even on the providership, typically high value man wants to provide. It's in his DNA, but he doesn't want to have to until you're together. So it's like, she doesn't have to have it all figured out or be making, it's not the money. It's just like, can she sustain herself? So I don't feel she needs me like a daddy. So that's kind of what our antenna ears are going. Like, is it through her language and the things that she's saying that I can sense I need to go save her because I've done the work to not be a savior. So we're kind of assessing, does she need a savior, or does she got herself enough that we can really get to know each other and then decide if this is going to work? And if so, then I want to handle most things, and like, she can do what she wants with her own money, right?
Right, because it's not pressurized.
It's not pressure. Yeah, it removes the pressure. So one piece is on that. I'd say the second piece is on family. Like, a lot of men have said, like, hey, give it 9 months. Like, really get to know, and it's really your nervous systems. Like, if you have alignment, if you have chemistry, if you have compatibility, then you get in and it works and there's fireworks. But the nervous system reactions, how do you guys do conflict, is really what you're waiting for. What men are saying, stay enough time to make sure I'm not in a pattern, make sure we're not in a trauma bond. Like, they're really bringing awareness to, can we have time go on where how do we do conflict? Do we nurture each other's nervous systems? And that goes to what I was saying. Can she also meet me?
Yeah.
If I'm willing to take ownership for where I'm making mistakes and what I need to work on, can I bring my request to her? And is she willing to look at that too, or is it just on me? That's where I find most are falling in the depth of relationship. So they're able to find them and go, oh, everything checks the box. We're getting into partnership. We're going deeper. But then when the ones that don't work, that's where I see them start to fall off, is like, oh, in conflict, we don't feel like we're meeting each other. And so I think the time and space is really helpful. And I was actually just talking with the girl around this. For a woman that's in that boat, because there may be a woman that's going like, I feel my clock ticking, I feel this pressure. I would invite, explore the options, like face that uncomfortability, explore like, hey, what are all the options I'm okay with? Am I okay with, can I freeze my eggs? Am I okay with adoption? Like, get really clear on your plans so it removes some of the pressure, but you can still be very clear. Like, you could still meet a partner that you guys could move very quickly, but it will remove some of the pressure on like, is this the one? Is this the one? Which could feel a little like, do you just need a baby daddy, or do you actually see me?
Yes. Yeah. The pressure, that's what I'm hearing a lot, is like this removal of pressure, the art of repair in conflict, and also like, the deep seeing of one another's soul substance and being able to meet in that. And if that constitution, that foundation of love and genuine curiosity for one another is there, then all of these other things can be worked through. And that's also the art of a relationship, is you learn the language of it and you keep working on it as long as you're together. And yeah, all such beautiful codes. Josh, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your medicine. Thank you for doing the work that you do. Thank you for being such a safe space for women. I feel it with you so deeply, and felt so like enlivened by our conversation the other night and the depth of presence that you hold.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm curious where women and men can find you. I know you're moving into more women's work now, right?
Yeah, I still do coaching, like for high value men and women, or high achieving men and women. So I still do 101, but I'm also doing a women's container, and I'm really excited about, called the Sovereign Woman, that I just launched, and that'll continue to grow. That's framed for women that are wanting a relationship with the high value man and the steps that they got to work through. They can find me at joshuawenner.com, my website, or joshuamichaelwenner.com is my Instagram.
Awesome. Yay. That's an exciting container, ladies. You hear that? Sovereign Woman. And, again, this code of something my mom said to me a long time ago. She's like, Zoe, you're not going to heal your father wound unless you work with a man. She's like, I feel deeply that when you work with a man, you're going to heal the depth of the somatics of the father wound and where it lives in your body. Because it's one thing to intellectualize it, but it's another thing to be in the presence of a man who's done the work and a man who can hold presence, right? Most of us women never grew up with a present masculine ever. Like, it's so foreign to us. So yeah, thank you again.
Thank you. It's been so fun.
Yeah, I know. It flew by.
I know.
All right,
good.
Josh. Yeah.
This is fun.
Thank you, everyone who's tuned in. Mwah. Till next time.